Hello Raptors fans and welcome back to Raptors Report. Today we are going to be talking about the Toronto Raptors game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. But before we do that, I want to talk about the players that will be returning from the injury reserve list and what it means for the Toronto Raptors moving forward from a win-loss perspective. I think that the general consensus among fans of the team who are watching the games and are looking at perhaps a little bit further beyond the win-loss column have reason to be optimistic. I think that most people would be saying that the Toronto Raptors are actually playing pretty good basketball right now and are simply just the victims of circumstance, victims of the very difficult schedule that they've had to play, and are actually playing competent basketball under Darko Rajakovic, and with the return of Scottie Barnes, have looked like they have some of the top-end talent required to be competitive with some of the best teams in the league. Last night's game against the Cleveland Cavaliers was a hard-fought loss, but when you look at the process and you see what the team has been able to do, I think it looks like they're about to turn the corner. Once an easier section of the schedule comes up, I think that you will start to see a difference in the win-loss column. But it goes beyond that because there are some significant veteran pieces that will be returning from the injury reserve list in the near future. And the reason that I know this is because the team itself and media members who cover the team have been hinting that Bruce Brown, one of the key pieces in the return for Pascal Siakam, has been practicing with the team and will be returning to the lineup probably in this 4-game road trip. So he wasn't available last night, but if you read the tea leaves, it looks like perhaps in tonight's game or the coming games, he will be suited up and ready to play for the Raptors. And there's another player as well who has been on an injury timeline, Kelly Olynyk. The team has released a tentative timeline for Kelly Olynyk's back injury recovery. They said it would take around 3 weeks, and that timeline is starting to come to completion. So although I haven't heard anything regarding him returning in the immediate future, it seems as though he will be on the Toronto Raptors probably within the next week or so. So why don't we take a look at both of those players. Bruce Brown, we can start with. Bruce Brown, as you may know, is an NBA world champion. He was the 6th man for the Denver Nuggets when they won the title 2 years ago. He was a key contributor to that team and did a lot of really good things for them. He was kind of a Swiss Army knife player, 3-and-D, who could handle the ball a little bit, help run the second unit. He was one of the best cutters in the whole league, and that is an important part of the Toronto Raptors offensive scheme. They love guys who can move off of the ball, cut to the basket, make themselves available for passes. And he has also been saying good things. He was saying things that are music to most Raptors fans' ears, acknowledging that last season was not a very good one for him, and I would have to agree. When he was signed by the Indiana Pacers for a pretty hefty sum, he went there and was pretty unimpressive. His three-point shot never really materialized. He used a lot of possessions but wasn't very efficient, and it seemed as though he was not going to be a long-term part of Indiana's future. And as a result, he was expendable when it came to trading for Pascal Siakam. And the Toronto Raptors picked up Bruce Brown, and he wasn't much better for the Raptors. I'd say probably worse for the Raptors. And Bruce Brown attributes this to the lingering knee issue, which he said had plagued him the entire season and made it so that he could not really play up to the level that he felt he was capable of. Unfortunately for the Raptors, they picked up his contract option at the beginning of the summer. Bruce Brown waited until right before training camp began to have knee surgery, and that was very unfortunate timing. I know it made me a little upset. The team and Bruce Brown said that it was a medical setback that happened near towards training camp, so perhaps re-injuring the knee, but at the same time, it's unwelcome news, and he has been missing for the entire season thus far. I am happy that Bruce Brown has acknowledged that last season was not very good. I am happy that he has said that the Toronto Raptors are his main focus this season, that he wants to come in, play well for the team, and he has even hinted that this could be the location for him. He likes the city, he's happy with his teammates, he wants to make a difference and contribute to winning. All well and good. Glad to hear that kind of stuff. I am slightly cynical. One of the biggest things that I am nervous about is how much of his success is due to playing off of superstars. So when he was with Brooklyn, he looked like a very competent role player. And I was actually kind of petitioning for the Toronto Raptors to sign him way back when he was sort of broke out for the Brooklyn Nets, when Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant were on the team. He played off of those players very well. They created a lot of space for him. That's where his shot kind of started to pick up. He became a pretty good corner merchant for them. And then when he went to Denver, he continued in that vein, playing off of the best player in the league, Nikola Jokic, who is extremely adept at finding off-ball players, notably players who are in the corner, players who are cutting, and those are two of Bruce Brown's skills that he can utilize on offense. When he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he's very good at cutting to the rim, playing in the space that those superstars provide to them. And in a vacuum, that's actually probably something that the Toronto Raptors could use. The Toronto Raptors offense is all about off-ball movement. It is all about using the gravity that other people create for you on the floor and filling the space wisely in order to create good scoring opportunities. And so if that is the Bruce Brown that the Toronto Raptors are getting, the elite off-ball player that can play in those gaps in the floor, can shoot from the corner, cut to the basket, I would be very happy with that. Unfortunately, I don't know how much of that is translatable. Is Bruce Brown's three-point shot for real? There are a lot of players who have come into the league, had a couple of seasons where they shoot above their heads, make a lot of the shots that are open, and then for the rest of their career, they are no longer a good three-point shooter. That's one concern. The other is the tendencies that I saw when Bruce Brown was playing with the Toronto Raptors last season. What he was doing on the floor did not look very good. He was handling the ball far more than he ever did when he was with Brooklyn or Denver, and it made sense. The Toronto Raptors were missing a lot of players, a lot of the top-level talent that would be using the ball and dribbling and making plays, so perhaps he felt that he needed to fill that up. But at the same time, when he had the ball in his hands, he was not making good decisions with the ball. He would too often try difficult shots that didn't have a good chance of going in. He would turn the ball over. He would make poor decisions with the ball in his hands, and his three-point shot was MIA. It did not materialize with the Toronto Raptors. So there are a couple of ways you can look at it. Will he come back? Will he be healthy? And if he is healthy, are his tenures with the Nets and the Denver Nuggets the real deal? Is that the real Bruce Brown that we can look forward to seeing, or was it a flash in the pan? Those are both questions that I want to see answered. But even if we are getting a lesser version of Bruce Brown, could it still make a difference for the Toronto Raptors off of the bench? The bench has been a sore spot for the Toronto Raptors this season, notwithstanding the play of Chris Boucher, who has kind of carried the Raptors bench from a scoring standpoint, but they certainly need more depth in that area. And if he can play off of the bench at a competent level, play good defense, be blended in with starting lineups, so play off of RJ Barrett, play off of Scotty Barnes, that kind of thing, perhaps play with Jakob Poeltl where he can get some screens off of the ball. Maybe he can go back to being one of the best role players in the league, at which point the Toronto Raptors would have a valuable asset on their hands. So that's kind of how I feel about Bruce Brown. Interested to see what he can do when he gets back into the lineup, and perhaps he can give the Raptors the lift off the bench that they need. Let's talk Kelly Olynyk. Kelly Olynyk is another veteran player who is in a very similar situation to Bruce Brown. Injured for the first part of the season, he has not played a single minute with the Raptors this year. He was pretty good with the Raptors last season on the offensive end. He is still a liability on defense. And unfortunately for Kelly Olynyk and Canadian basketball fans like myself, he did not have a good summer with the Canadian Olympic team. He was not effective shooting the ball, which is one of his main skills. His defense was quite poor, and his rebounding was not very impressive either. That said, he has a pretty long history in the NBA of being a competent role player who can do a number of things for your offense. And he will probably play the backup big role off of the bench and give the Toronto Raptors a different look in terms of bigs. Jakob Poeltl being a traditional big man who is good defensively and limited offensively. I think he's a good offensive player, but he does all of his damage 10 feet and in. Kelly Olynyk is a different player. He is a face to the basket big. He can handle the ball a little bit, and while he can help run your offense, kind of like Jakob Poeltl, he can also shoot the ball. So you can use him in different types of offensive plays, like pick and pops. You can use him much higher up above the three-point line. You can use him as off-ball spacing to draw people out of the paint. There are a couple of things that he brings to the table that Jakob Poeltl does not, and it could be a very useful player for the Toronto Raptors to have, especially in light of their pretty dire big man situation. So, those two players are coming back. Whether those two players are going to be very effective is one of the biggest questions facing the team moving forward. I am not completely convinced that either of them is going to be a big-time difference maker, but I feel like if they can play at a replacement level or above that, then the Toronto Raptors are going to be a better team from a depth perspective, which is one of their flaws this season, is that they are not a very deep team. And in terms of what the Toronto Raptors are going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, I think that a softer part of the schedule is headed their way. They are going to be playing some teams under 500. They are on a 4-game road trip, and then they arrive back home for a 7-game homestand. So the schedule is starting to soften up for the Toronto Raptors, and it looks like they might be able to do some damage in the win-loss column. So let's move on to the player evaluations from last night's game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. This was one of the games where I don't think there was a clear standout performance where one guy played so well, so far above everybody else's head, that you can really highlight them and say, hey, this guy was easily the best player for the Raptors. But in the starting lineup, we'll start with Scottie Barnes. His stats, just looking at that, he had a good statistical night, if not a fantastic one. Just watching the game, I think he had high highs and low lows during this game. He had 18 points on 14 shots. He was 1 of 6 from 3, so he kind of settled for 3-point shots quite a bit. And one of the main reasons for that is because of the Cavs' very stalwart interior defense, headlined by Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, who are two elite rim protectors and very good, can move their feet, can track players like Scottie Barnes as they move to the basket, and contest pretty much everything. So it makes sense that he would want to stretch it out a little bit, but he did not have the accuracy last night in order to make that work. I feel like he had a much better second half. He drew a ton of fouls, one of them a very violent foul. Jarrett Allen kind of boinked him on the face with his forearm. There was a scare. People were worried that he would have re-injured his orbital bone, but thankfully that was not the case. It was just a pretty hard foul on his face. He finished 7 of 12 from the free throw line, so his free throw shooting is still a bit of a question mark. It hasn't rounded into form this season. He had 7 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 steals, a block, and only 1 turnover. And he looked good in the second half. I would say that in the second half, he was the Toronto Raptors' best player. He gave them a lot of momentum and spark. He was trying to get his team jazzed and trying to make the Cavs think twice about the Toronto Raptors. And you can tell that he likes to play with fire on the court. He screamed right in Evan Mobley's face after getting a block on him in the post. There were a couple of encouraging plays where he stole the ball and got out on the fast break. I think he was very disruptive defensively. It was a very impressive game on the defensive end for Scottie Barnes. He made a lot of plays on defense. And just kind of unfortunate that his offense was not there last night. It was not a good offensive night for him. And I think a lot of that you have to give credit to the Cavaliers because they're a very good defensive team, especially on the inside where Scottie Barnes likes to get things going. Next up, we'll talk Grady Dick. He had 18 points on 17 shots. He was 3 of 9 from 3, 3 of 3 from the line, 4 rebounds, an assist, and 1 turnover. That has been his Achilles heel over the past couple of games, is his handle has been picked at by other teams. He didn't really have a problem with that. And in my opinion, this was Grady Dick's best defensive game of the season. I thought that he looked very sharp in his rotations. He was getting out to the perimeter and challenging shots. He was staying in front of players. He had a particularly nice defensive possession against Donovan Mitchell, who is, as you know, is one of the best offensive players in the league. He managed to stay in front of Donovan Mitchell and contest his shot, and Donovan Mitchell missed it. I think he was just effective on defense. All he needs to do is show that he is a competent individual defender, and then other teams will stop trying to target him as much. He left in the fourth quarter near towards the end with calf soreness, so we'll have to see whether that is a lingering thing or whether it was just a cramp and he needed to leave the floor. Not exactly sure, but he had an okay night. Again, kind of like Scottie Barnes, he wasn't fantastic, and he struggled with his shooting a little bit. He was only 3 of 9 from 3, which isn't horrible, but not great. He was 6 of 17 from the field, ditto there. But I felt like he never quite gave up. He continued to shoot. He continued to try and make plays. I was kind of feeling like it was going to be one of those nights for him where he just didn't have it going at all, but he kept shooting the ball, and then he eventually made it a pretty decent night for himself on the offensive end. So when you take in the defense, the growth that I've seen from him over the past couple of games on the defensive end, and his mediocre shooting night, I would say that he was the second best player in the starting lineup. Next up, we will go to Jakob Poeltl. Jakob Poeltl has been the Toronto Raptors' best player this season because, Scotty Barnes has missed most of the games this season. Jak has been kind of their rock. He has been the guy who has been the most consistent on a night-to-night basis. Fortunately, last night he ran into probably the player who he has the worst games against, Jarrett Allen. We saw it in the home opener. He didn't have a good game there. He didn't have a very good game last night, although, just like Scotty, he had a bounce-back performance in the second half. He had 12 points on 12 shots. Not incredible. He was 2 of 3 from the free throw line. The big stat for him was the 19 rebounds. So he had 8 offensive rebounds. He had 11 defensive rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 2 blocks, and 1 turnover. So from a statistical standpoint, he had a good game. You can see that he is definitely the Raptors' best rebounder. He is key at getting defensive rebounds, keeping other big teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers. Their front court is very large. Jarrett Allen is obviously one of the better offensive rebounders in the league, ditto Evan Mobley. When those two are on the court at the same time, they like to get inside and pick at offensive rebounds, get putbacks, get second opportunities, and Jakob Poeltl did a good job on the boards last night, in fact, creating a bunch of secondary opportunities for the Toronto Raptors with 8 offensive rebounds. So I think he had a good night, but not a great one. Jarrett Allen is kind of a nightmare matchup for him. Jarrett Allen is also 7 feet tall. He's not a shrimp, but Jak is more of a finesse big when it comes to interior scoring. He uses his foot speed and his hook shots, his push shots, his layups, and that sort of thing. And that is Jarrett Allen's forte, is stopping those kinds of shots. He's very good at blocking finesse shots around the rim. His weakness as a player, we saw 2 seasons ago when they played the sort of very rough and rugged New York Knicks with Julius Randle and their 2 very large big men in Isaiah Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson, who just are huge bodies, and they're more brutish, I would say, than Jakob Poeltl. They kind of punish you on the inside, use their body as a weapon, and that is where Jarrett Allen can struggle. But against bigs like Jakob Poeltl, he really does a good job of shutting that down because he also has really good foot speed and he has very long arms. He can recover and block Jakob Poeltl's push shot. So Jak never feels very comfortable playing around Jarrett Allen, which is unfortunate. I think that Jak has been one of the advantages that the Toronto Raptors have had this season. He has played very competently against some of the other bigs in the league, some of the other star bigs. And last night, he just didn't have it from an offensive standpoint against Jarrett Allen. And from a defensive standpoint, of course, the center, their main job is playing help defense. So you can't just look at the one-on-one matchup between 2 centers and say, well, this guy had a better night, so the other one wasn't playing very good defense. But obviously, at least a little bit of it is stopping the other team's center. And from that perspective, he didn't have a very good night. Jarrett Allen scored 23 points, had 13 rebounds, and looked pretty dominant in the paint. He got a lot of offensive rebounds as well. It's a tough matchup for Jakob Poeltl, although I think he acquitted himself decently, especially in the second half. Next up, Ochai Agbaji. Ochai Agbaji did a decent job on defense, although not incredible. I've said many times that Ochai Agbaji is a good defender, but not elite. When we saw OG Anunoby playing against Donovan Mitchell, that was like a nightmare for Donovan Mitchell. OG Anunoby would regularly hold him under 10 points to horrible shooting percentages. He had the combination of foot speed, toughness. Donovan Mitchell is kind of a rugged guard. He has broad shoulders. He can run into you, get you off balance, and then step back and hit an accurate 3. And as we all know, OG Anunoby is built like a tank. If you run into him, you're the one bouncing off of him. So he could never really get that going. And OG Anunoby would track you around the court like a cat and block your shot or steal the ball off of you or bully you. And Ochai Agbaji is not that level of defender. Donovan Mitchell had a pretty strong offensive outing, which is unfortunate, but I think that he had an okay game. He does deliver things on the defensive side of the ball that you can't overlook. He had 9 points on 6 shots, which is decent. He had 5 rebounds, 1 assist, and a turnover. I just don't think it was, up to the caliber that we have seen from him this season. I think he had a decent game, but not a great one. It's kind of the common theme here, at least from the starters. And last on the list, I'm going to put RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett's efficiency was not very good. 16 points on 18 shots, 2 of 3 from 3, so he did okay there. His free throw shooting remains a big problem. He was 2 of 6 from the free throw line. He had 6 rebounds, 6 assists, so that's pretty good, and only 1 turnover. So yeah, RJ Barrett continues to do stuff that is positive and continues to do stuff that is negative. One of the big problems is his off-ball defense. I've said it over and over and over again. He has a very bad habit of losing track of his man and leaving them open. And there are just times when he leaves them open almost for no reason, considerably out of position, and it leads to just one pass away open shots. And that is just devastating for a defense. If a team is shooting open 3-point shots, especially a team like the Cavs who have a ton of very good shooters, it's hard to overlook, especially when he's not delivering on the offensive end, where he's making a difference on that end. And I've mentioned this in the past, it makes sense why he struggled. I've said that this season, when a guy who is primarily a slasher, a player who goes to the rim and makes plays there, they are going to have problems with elite rim protectors, and the Cavs have 2 of the best. Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley are 2 of the best rim protectors in the entire league, and that showed up in the box score. And because he wasn't particularly efficient last night and the defense was pretty poor, you just can't give him a passing grade. I think that was probably his worst game that he's had in a while, because he's had such strong performances since his little mini slump on the last road trip that they were on. Hopefully he's not a home merchant. Hopefully he can show Raptors fans that he can contribute on the road, and he'll have an opportunity to do that against the Detroit Pistons, who are not a great interior defensive team, not like the Cavs by any stretch of the imagination. So we'll have a chance to bounce back tonight. We'll see if he can do that. Next up, the bench. And I think that off of the bench, you saw some of the Raptors' best performers. We'll always start with Chris Boucher. He had limited minutes last night, I think just based on the size of the Cavs, but he had it going in those limited minutes. He had 10 points on 3 of 7 shooting. He missed all of his threes, so not a great shooting night from him, but he was 4 of 4 from the line. He had more points than shots. He had 3 rebounds and 2 steals, 0 turnovers. He looked good. You know, he is a solid bench scorer. He was the Toronto Raptors' best player in the first half. That's where he did most of his damage. He has been pretty good in terms of a consistency standpoint this season. He seems to be bringing it more nights than he does not, and he has been the Raptors' best bench player this season, and that was no different last night. Well, he was not the best Raptors bench player last night, but he was a solid contributor off of the bench, so he did a good job. And that should be a hint. There's one other guy on the bench who played very well last night, and if you watch the game, it should be no surprise at all. Jonathan Mobo had a career evening. He scored a career-high 13 points on 8 shots. He hit a 3. He was 1 of 2 from 3. 4 of 4 from the line, 2 offensive rebounds, 7 rebounds in total, 0 assists, which is kind of odd for him. He usually chips in a couple there. He had a steal, he had a block, and only 1 turnover, and the defense was great. I loved what he was doing on defense. The great thing about him is his defensive versatility. And when he is matched up against players such as Evan Mobley, who is an interior player, he has some perimeter skills that are not very polished. He can do a little bit on the perimeter, but is mostly a guy who plays the interior game. He did a very good job covering him. He stripped him once. He had a couple of very nice plays in the paint, but then also when you need him to, if there's a scramble or there's a player on the perimeter that you have to switch onto, he can do that. He can guard the perimeter, he can move his feet, swivel his hips, stay in front of players and contest shots. His biggest issue has been fouling because he is a rookie and there are so many crafty scorers in the NBA that can get you in the air and make you pay at the free throw line. But that wasn't the case last night. He only had 1 foul. I thought that was probably his best game of the season. And one of the reasons it was his best game of the season was from an offensive standpoint. He was bringing it on the offensive end because we know that he can play defense. He is a strong defender. He can stay in front of guys. The issue has been just what are you getting from him on the offensive end? Can he finish near the basket? Can he stretch the floor out? He had 2 3-point shots, which is encouraging. He made one of the corner threes that he took, and it wasn't a desperation shot. I think it was pretty early in the shot clock he made it, and he was active. He likes the push shot, so he's probably learned a little bit from Jakob Poeltl. Maybe he's picked that up. Maybe that was his game in college. I didn't watch him too much, but he has a pretty competent push shot. He showed it off against Minnesota. He showed it off last night. That seems to be a good weapon for undersized bigs, because one of the biggest hurdles in the NBA is that you're dealing with way more size than you are in college. So a lot of the moves where, you can get to the rim and finish in college because you're one of the biggest players, even at 6'9" or 6'8" or whatever Jonathan Mogbo is measured at, that's not going to be the case in the NBA. You're going to be dealing with bigger guys. So you have to add little things to your toolbox that are good shots that you can take around the length and size of NBA players. And if that's a push shot, I think that's a very good tool for a player like Jonathan Mogbo to have. Very encouraged with what he was able to do last night. I hope he keeps it up. And, he's showing flashes. That's what you want to see from younger players. You want to see those little flashes of competence and potential. And we saw a lot of flashes last night from Jonathan Mogbo. We'll briefly touch on Jamal Shead. Jamal Shead had a pretty good game. He was 2 of 5 from the field, both of those being threes, so that's where he got his points from. 2 rebounds, 2 assists, a very nice steal where he just stole it and then jumped on it, and they were able to get out on the fast break. He was pretty disruptive, but Ty Jerome was a menace and made the backup guards look pretty silly. Jamal Shead was one of them. He was very good at reading the passing lanes. He stole the ball from errant passes all night long. Jamal Shead was one of his victims in that regard. And I think he had a mixed effort. I thought he was good on offense, and weirdly enough, I thought he was not very good on defense. So, okay night for Jamal Shead. Next up, Davion Mitchell. And he had such a superb game against the Minnesota Timberwolves that you have to average everything out. You can't get too high. You can't get too low. You have to evaluate everything in context. And what I've seen from Davion Mitchell this season, I would say has been a slight positive. And I was expecting a negative, so he has surpassed my expectations, but last night was not a good night for Davion Mitchell. He had 6 turnovers. He was really struggling to run the offense. Ty Jerome was a nightmare for him. So we saw him lock up, or at least play excellent defense on Anthony Edwards, one of the best players in the league. And then he really struggled on both ends against Ty Jerome. Ty Jerome is very crafty and sneaky, and all of these kind of pejorative terms that you love when they're on your team, but you hate when they're on the other team. And Ty Jerome has a whole bag of tricks, and he used them all last night. Davion Mitchell was not effective at guarding Ty Jerome. He was not effective on offense. A lot of the time when Ty Jerome would just sneak in and steal the ball from him. I think that last night, unfortunately, was Davion Mitchell's worst game as a Raptor, which seems very odd because, he chipped in 6 points and he was 2 of 4 from the field with 2 of 3 from 3. So he did that kind of thing. But as you well know, his calling card is on the defensive end. His defense is the big thing he brings to the table. I thought he was terrible defensively. And then the 6 turnovers are just a death knell for any kind of ball handler. 6 turnovers, 6 points. That is just bad any way you slice it. I'm not discouraged, though. I think that he will continue to be a good defensive player. Ty Jerome is a slippery customer, and unfortunately he had Davion Mitchell's number last night. So that was the game. I think there were good things to take away from it. I think that the Cavs are obviously a very good team, and they kind of walked all over the Raptors in the first quarter. It was a 38-point first quarter. They were nailing threes. They were playing free and easy. The second quarter was where the Raptors dug in their heels and made sure that they weren't going to get blown out. The Cavs are very good at home. They haven't lost a game at home. So you have to take everything in context. You can't just say oh, okay, they lost by 14 points. Raptors suck. Move on to the next one. If you look at the game, there are things to take away from it that are positive. They didn't quit. There are some teams, especially rookie, young teams, that would just get down to the Cavs, who are phenomenal at home and are a dangerous team on both ends. They can shut you down on defense, and then they can score on offense. It can become very discouraging. The Toronto Raptors went into their gas tank, and they gutted out a good second quarter that made the Cavs think twice. They brought it down to within single digits and even closer at certain points in the second and third quarter before Cleveland pulled away in the fourth quarter. But you can't be too unhappy with the way that the Toronto Raptors played this game. I think their worst players in the first half, so Jakob Poeltl and Scotty Barnes, who have been their best players this season. had a very positive second half. They both bounced back in the second half and made themselves two of the better players in the game. The Toronto Raptors are going to have a hard time beating a team with as good interior defense as the Cleveland Cavaliers without good shooting. The way that you beat teams that play two bigs, like the Cavs do, is you have to have enough shooting. The paint is going to be off limits. If you try and drive in, there's two guys waiting there for you who have elite instincts. Of course, the Toronto Raptors signed a pretty good guy in the offseason, pretty good shooter in Immanuel Quickley, and he has been in and out of the lineup with injury. If you have Immanuel Quickley in the lineup, maybe things are a little bit different because he can provide all of that spacing on the offensive side. It becomes a lot harder to guard teams when you have one of those elite shooters in your lineup. And although the Raptors turned in a good effort, the Cavs are one of the best teams in the league. So the Raptors fell to 4-13, and up next, I mentioned it before, they will be playing the Detroit Pistons. And the Detroit Pistons have had a mixed season so far. They haven't looked as terrible as they have in the past. They are 7-11. They have competent role players. I think that they made a good decision in their coaching hire. They're playing hard. JB Bickerstaff has these guys working at their game. They have some veterans that they can mix in and give them a little bit of a lift to help out the younger players. So they're a pretty decent team, but at the same time, they are below 500. They've lost 3 games in a row. They're on a bit of a slide. They're not a team that the Toronto Raptors can't beat. And I feel like the Toronto Raptors are playing well enough that they will have a pretty good opportunity to win in Detroit. So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited to watch it. And that's the video. What do you think will be the result of Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk coming back? Are those guys good role players still? Are they washed? You let me know here in the comments and on Twitter and Blue Sky, where you can reach me at Raps Report. And if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. It definitely helps me out, helps out the channel, helps it grow, lets other people see what kind of content this is, and I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.